The reservation at Le Bernardin had been made 3 months in advance for Dad's 60th birthday celebration. 8 family members seated around a table that could have accommodated 12, the empty chairs serving as silent testimony to the relationships that had crumbled over the years. I sat at the far end, dressed in what Mom would no doubt criticize as one of those plain black outfits, though the understated Armani dress had cost more than most people's monthly rent. Not that anyone at this table would know that. To them I was still just Sophia, the daughter who'd lost her way and refused to settle down like a normal person. 60 years, Dad said, raising his wine glass with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to being the center of attention. I never thought I'd see this day, especially not surrounded by such a beautiful family. The toast felt hollow, considering the tension that had been building throughout dinner like a storm system gathering strength. My presence had been tolerated rather than welcomed. Every attempt at conversation met with polite indifference or outright dismissal. To Richard Williams, Mom added, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent 35 years as the perfect corporate wife. The most successful man I know and the father of 2 wonderful children. 2 children. Not 3. The omission was deliberate and cutting. My older brother Derek raised his glass enthusiastically, basking in the implied praise. At 38 he was everything my parents had hoped for in a son: Harvard MBA, senior partner at a prestigious law firm, married to the right kind of woman with the right kind of pedigree. His wife Jennifer smiled adoringly beside him, their 2 young children seated between them like perfect accessories to their perfect life. My younger sister Melissa, 27 and recently engaged to a hedge fund manager, completed the picture of family success. She was everything I wasn't: blonde where I was brunette, social where I was private, conventional where I was, well, whatever I was. And here's to family, Derek added, his voice carrying just enough edge to let me know the comment was directed at me. The people who stick together through thick and thin, who share the same values and priorities. I took a sip of my wine, a 2015 Bordeaux that retailed for $400 a bottle, though the restaurant had marked it up to $800. I'd noticed the price when Dad ordered it, wincing slightly at the cost. It was a tell that spoke volumes about the family's financial situation, though none of them realized I'd caught it. Speaking of family, Mom said, her voice taking on the pointed tone that always preceded an attack, we need to discuss something that's been weighing on your father and me. Here it comes, I thought, setting down my wine glass and preparing for whatever fresh humiliation they'd planned for Dad's birthday celebration. Sophia, Mom continued, turning her attention to me with the kind of cold focus usually reserved for particularly stubborn stains, we've been patient with your phase for far too long. Pie phase. This whole independent woman act. The refusal to get married, the mysterious job you won't talk about, the way you've isolated yourself from the family. I'm sitting right here. Physically, yes. But emotionally, spiritually, you've been absent for years. I looked around the table at the faces I'd grown up with, searching for any sign of support or understanding. Derek was studying his dessert like it contained the secrets of the universe. Jennifer was checking her phone. Melissa was reapplying lipstick. Even Dad seemed uncomfortable, though he wasn't intervening. I've been building a life, I said quietly. What kind of life? Mom demanded. You live alone in some apartment downtown, you work at a job you refuse to discuss. You don't date anyone we've met. That's not a life, Sophia. That's hiding. Maybe I'm hiding because every time I try to share something with this family, it gets dismissed or criticized. We've never criticized you unfairly. The denial was so breathtakingly untrue that I almost laughed. Really? Because last Christmas, when I mentioned my work was going well, Dad asked when I was going to get serious about my future and find a husband. That was practical advice, Dad interjected, speaking for the first time in several minutes. A woman needs security, Sophia. Financial stability. A partner to build a life with. I have financial stability. Do you? Because from what we can see, you're barely getting by. The assumption was so far from reality that I felt dizzy. I made more money in a month than Dad made in 3 years, but they'd constructed this narrative about my struggling finances based on my modest lifestyle and refused to consider any alternatives. How would you know what my financial situation is? We have eyes, sweetheart, Mom said with the patient condescension of someone explaining basic concepts to a slow child. You drive a 10-year-old car, you live in a studio apartment, You shop at regular stores instead of the places where successful people shop. Maybe I like my car. Maybe I prefer my apartment. Maybe I don't need designer clothes to feel good about myself. Or maybe you can't afford better, Melissa chimed in, speaking for the first time all evening. There's no shame in struggling, Sophia. But there is shame in pretending you're not. The cruelty was breathtaking. Here was my own sister whom I'd helped pay for law school just 2 years ago, suggesting I was too poor to afford a decent lifestyle. I'm not struggling, I said firmly. Then why won't you tell us what you actually do for work? Derek asked. Every time someone asks, you change the subject or give vague answers about consulting. Because you wouldn't understand it. Try us, Mom challenged. We're not stupid despite what you apparently think. I considered my options. I could tell them the truth, that I was the founder and CEO of Meridian Global, a technology company worth $4.7 billion. That I employed over 8,000 people across 6 countries. That I'd been featured on the cover of Fortune magazine as one of the youngest female billionaires in history. But I'd learned over the years that sharing my successes with this family only led to new forms of criticism. When I tried to tell them about my first $1 million deal, Dad had lectured me about the dangers of risky investments. When I'd mentioned my company's rapid growth, Mom had worried about the stress I was putting myself under. When I'd been honored by the Chamber of Commerce, they'd suggested I was showing off. I develop software solutions for large corporations, I said, which was technically true if dramatically understated. Software, Mom repeated with the same tone she might use to say, garbage collection. And that pays enough to support yourself? It pays enough. But not enough to buy a proper car or a decent apartment. My car and apartment are fine. They're not fine, Sophia, Dad said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he'd perfected during 30 years of corporate management. They're the choices of someone who's given up, someone who's settled for mediocrity. Or someone who has different priorities than you do. What priorities? Mom demanded. Because from where we're sitting, it looks like your only priority is avoiding responsibility. Responsibility for what? For growing up. For becoming the woman we raised you to be. For finding a husband and starting a family like normal people do. The conversation was spiraling into familiar territory, the same arguments we'd been having for years, the same disappointments and recriminations that defined every family gathering. What if I don't want a normal life? I asked. Everyone wants a normal life, Jennifer said, speaking up for the first time. Marriage, children, security, community. Those are basic human needs. Maybe they're not my needs. Then what are your needs? Mom asked. Because honestly, we can't figure out what you want from life. I want to be respected for who I am, not criticized for who I'm not. Respect is earned, sweetheart, Dad said. And earning respect requires making choices that others can understand and admire. Like Derek's choices? Exactly like Derek's choices. He built a successful career, married a wonderful woman, had beautiful children. He's contributing something meaningful to the world. And I'm not. Are you? The question hung in the air like a challenge. I thought about the educational software my company had developed that was now used in schools across 43 countries. I thought about the medical diagnostic tools that had helped doctors save thousands of lives. I thought about the renewable energy platforms that were reducing carbon emissions around the globe. But I also thought about every time I tried to share these accomplishments with my family, only to have them dismissed, minimized, or ignored. You know what? Mom said suddenly, her voice taking on a finality that made my stomach clench. I think we've been enabling this behavior long enough. What behavior? This refusal to grow up, to take responsibility, to become a productive member of society. I am a productive member of society. Are you? Because productive members of society don't hide their lives from their families. They don't make mysterious references to work they won't explain. They don't choose isolation over connection. The attack was gaining momentum now, and I could see the agreement in the faces around the table. Even Dad, who'd always been the gentler parent, was nodding along. I think it's time for some tough love, Mom continued. Time to stop pretending that your choices are acceptable just because they're yours. What are you saying? I'm saying that until you decide to rejoin the real world, to make decisions that show you value family and stability and normal human connections, we're done enabling your delusions. Why delusions? Your delusion that you can live however you want without consequences. Your delusion that family doesn't matter. Your delusion that success means something other than building a life that others can respect and admire. The restaurant around us was full of other families celebrating milestones, other groups of people who presumably loved and supported each other. At the table next to us, a young couple was toasting their engagement. Behind us, 3 generations of a family were laughing together over shared stories. And here we were, having what felt like a public execution disguised as a birthday dinner. "So what exactly are you proposing?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew. "We're proposing that you take some time to think about what really matters in life," Derek said, apparently having been elected as the family spokesperson. "And until you figure that out, we think it's best if you don't attend family gatherings." "You're uninviting me from family events?" "We're giving you space to grow up," Mom said. "Sometimes people need to experience natural consequences before they make better choices." "And if I don't make the choices you want?" Mom's face hardened into an expression I'd never seen before, cold, final, and completely without warmth. "Then you're dead to us," she said with devastating calm. "We'll proceed as if we have 2 children instead of 3. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd endured years of criticism, disappointment, and passive-aggressive commentary, but this was the first time they'd explicitly threatened to disown me. "You're serious," I said, though it wasn't really a question. "Completely serious," Dad confirmed. "We love you, Sophia, but we won't continue to enable behavior that's destructive to you and painful for us." "Destructive to me?" "Yes. You're 34 years old, unmarried, apparently barely employed, living in isolation. That's not healthy. And painful for us," Mom added, "because we have to watch you waste the potential we worked so hard to develop." I looked around the table one more time, seeing my family clearly for perhaps the first time in years. They weren't concerned about my happiness or well-being. They were embarrassed by my failure to conform to their expectations. "So this is it?" I asked. "Shape up or ship out?" "This is us loving you enough to set boundaries," Jennifer said, apparently feeling qualified to comment on family dynamics she'd been part of for less than 10 years. "Boundaries," I repeated. "Healthy boundaries," Melissa agreed. "You can't just do whatever you want and expect everyone else to pretend it's normal." The irony was overwhelming. Here I was being lectured about normal behavior by a family that was disowning their daughter at a public restaurant on her father's birthday. "I understand," I said quietly, reaching for my purse. "You've made your position very clear. Where are you going?" Mom asked. "Home. I think I've heard enough." "Sophia, wait," Dad said, though he made no move to get up. "We don't want this to end badly." "How did you want it to end?" "With you understanding that we're doing this because we care about you." "No, you're doing this because you're ashamed of me. There's a difference." I stood up from the table, aware that other diners were beginning to notice the drama unfolding at our corner table. A family implosion at Le Bernardin would provide excellent gossip for the social circles my parents inhabited. "Sophia," Mom said as I prepared to leave, "I want you to think very carefully about your next move. Because once you walk out that door, things will be different between us." "They already are different," I replied. "You just made that clear. We're giving you a choice. Come back to the family as a responsible adult, or don't come back at all." "Then I guess I won't be coming back." I turned to walk away, but Mom's voice stopped me. "Sophia, I meant what I said. If you leave now, you're dead to us. From this moment forward, we have 2 children, not 3. The finality in her voice was unmistakable. This wasn't a negotiating tactic or an empty threat. They were prepared to erase me from the family entirely rather than accept me as I was. "I understand," I said, and I meant it. As I walked toward the restaurant's exit, I heard Mom speaking to the remaining family members in a voice that carried clearly across the dining room. "From now on, everyone is to ignore her completely. She's dead to us. We don't speak to her, we don't acknowledge her, we don't respond to any attempts at contact. As far as this family is concerned, Sophia Williams no longer exists." The cruelty of making such an announcement in public with other diners listening was breathtaking. But it was also clarifying. After years of wondering whether my family truly loved me or simply loved the idea of who they thought I should be, I finally had my answer. I was almost to the door when Marcus entered the restaurant. At 6'4" with the build of someone who'd spent 20 years in military special operations, Marcus commanded attention wherever he went. His presence in the elegant dining room was like a boulder dropped into a still pond, impossible to ignore and completely transformative of the environment. "Ms. Williams," he said in his calm, professional voice, "your helicopter is ready." Every head in the restaurant turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as diners stared at the unexpected intrusion of what was clearly high-level security into their refined evening. "Thank you, Marcus," I replied, my voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent dining room. "I'll be right there." "Of course, ma'am." "We're cleared for immediate departure to the helipad. Your pilot confirms weather conditions are optimal for the flight to the Hamptons." Behind me, I could hear the sharp intake of breath from my family's table. The Hamptons. A helicopter. A bodyguard who spoke with the crisp efficiency of someone accustomed to protecting very important people. "Ms. Williams," said James, the sommelier who'd been serving our table, approaching with obvious excitement. "I don't mean to intrude, but aren't you the billionaire from the news? The one who just donated $50 million to the children's hospital?" The question rang out across the restaurant like a bell, and I could feel the atmosphere change as recognition dawned on faces throughout the dining room. "I prefer to keep my charitable activities private," I said diplomatically. Of course," James said, practically vibrating with excitement. "It's just that we're so honored to have you dining with us. The entire staff has been talking about the hospital donation. My nephew was treated there last year, and knowing that facility will be expanded because of your generosity. I'm glad I could help," I said simply. From my family's table, I heard what sounded like a wine glass hitting the floor. "Marcus," I said, turning back to my bodyguard, "has the car arrived for my guests?" "Yes, ma'am. The Bentley is waiting outside for Mrs. Patterson and her children." "Mrs. Patterson?" "That would be Margaret Patterson, the recently widowed mother of 3 whose husband had died in a car accident 6 months ago. I'd been quietly paying for her children's private school tuition and her mortgage while she got back on her feet." "And the college fund transfers?" "Completed this afternoon, ma'am. All 5 scholarships have been fully funded. 5 full college scholarships. Another $2.3 million in anonymous donations that would change 5 families' lives forever." The restaurant had gone completely silent now. Even the kitchen seemed to have stopped working as words spread that they were serving someone who casually discussed million-dollar charitable donations like other people discussed dinner plans. "Excuse me," said a voice behind me. I turned to see a woman in an elegant cocktail dress approaching hesitantly. "I'm Sarah Davidson from the Times. Could I possibly ask you about the renewable energy initiative you announced last week?" "The Renewable Energy Initiative. My company's $500 million investment in developing clean technology for underserved communities." The announcement had made headlines across the business world. "I prefer not to discuss business during personal time," I said politely. "Of course, I understand. It's just that the impact on climate change research could be revolutionary." "Ms. Williams," Marcus interrupted smoothly, "we should depart soon to avoid air traffic delays." "You're right," I agreed. "Thank you for a lovely evening, James. Please add a 20% gratuity for the staff." 20% of the bill, ma'am? 20% of the restaurant's gross revenue for tonight. Distribute it among all the employees. The number I just casually mentioned was easily $50,000 or more. James looked like he might faint. As Marcus and I walked toward the exit, I could hear the explosion of conversation behind us. 30 seconds ago, I'd been Sophia Williams, the family disappointment who couldn't afford a decent car. Now I was Sophia Williams, billionaire philanthropist who traveled by helicopter and made donations larger than most people's annual salaries. "Ma'am," Marcus said quietly as we reached the door, "your family appears to be in some distress." I glanced back at their table. Derek was on his phone frantically typing. Jennifer was staring at me with her mouth open. Melissa looked like she'd seen a ghost. Mom and Dad were frozen in their chairs, apparently unable to process what they'd just witnessed. "They'll be fine," I said. "They've just learned something new about someone they thought they knew." "Should I expect contact attempts?" "Almost certainly. But let's give them some time to process before we deal with that." As we stepped outside into the cool evening air, I could see the helicopter waiting on the nearby rooftop helipad, its rotors already spinning. The sight never got old. the symbol of a freedom I'd worked decades to achieve. "Where to tonight, Ms. Williams?" Marcus asked as we approached the Bentley that would take us to the helipad. "Home," I said. "And Marcus?" "Turn off my phone for the weekend. I have a feeling I'm going to be getting a lot of calls." The helicopter ride to my estate in the Hamptons took 18 minutes. From the air, I could see the lights of the massive property I'd purchased 3 years ago, 47 acres of oceanfront land with a main house, guest houses, stables and private beach. It was the kind of estate that appeared in architectural magazines and celebrity gossip columns. The kind of place where world leaders held summits and tech billionaires hosted charity galas. It was also the kind of place that my family had never seen because they'd never bothered to ask where I lived or what my life actually looked like. As the helicopter settled onto the private landing pad, I thought about Mom's final words at the restaurant. "She's dead to us." The irony was extraordinary. They'd just disowned one of the most successful entrepreneurs of my generation because she didn't fit their narrow definition of acceptable life choices. My phone buzzed insistently in my purse. 17 missed calls and 43 text messages in the 20 minutes since I'd left the restaurant. Word traveled fast in New York's elite circles, and apparently half the city now knew that the Williams family had publicly disowned a billionaire at dinner. I ignored the messages and walked into my house, where my assistant had left the weekend briefing materials on my desk. 3 board meetings next week, a charity gala in Los Angeles, a speech at Harvard Business School, and a dinner with 2 heads of state who were visiting New York for the United Nations Assembly. This was my life. Not the struggling, isolated existence my family had imagined, but a whirlwind of success, influence, and impact that would have been impossible to explain to people who'd already decided what my story was. The next morning brought consequences. By 8 a.m., my assistant had fielded 47 calls from various Williams family members. By 10 a.m., there were reporters staked outside the family's Connecticut home, asking for comments about their relationship with tech billionaire Sophia Williams. By noon, Derek had driven to my estate personally. "Jesus Christ, Sophia," he said when Marcus escorted him into my study. "What the hell was last night?" "A family dinner," I replied without looking up from the business plan I was reviewing. "Or it was until you all decided I was dead to you. We didn't know." "Didn't know what?" "That you were this." He gestured around my study, which was filled with awards, framed magazine covers, and photos of me meeting with world leaders. "That you were actually successful. You never asked. You never told us." "I tried to. Every family gathering for the past 10 years I tried to share pieces of my life with you. But you'd already decided what my story was, and nothing I said seemed to change that narrative." Derek sat down across from my desk, looking older than his 38 years. "The reporters want to know if it's true that our parents disowned you at dinner last night. What did you tell them?" "Nothing. But Sophia, this is a disaster. Dad's employer is asking questions. Mom's charity boards are calling. Everyone wants to know how the Williams family could have a billionaire daughter they knew nothing about. Maybe they should have asked better questions. This isn't a joke. Our reputation is destroyed." "Your reputation," I corrected. "As of last night I'm dead to you, remember? Your problems are no longer my problems." Derek was quiet for a long moment, staring at a photo on my desk of me shaking hands with the president. "How long?" he asked finally. "How long what? How long have you been this successful?" "I hit my first billion at 31. I've been building toward this for 15 years. And you never told us." "Derek, 3 years ago at your wedding I tried to explain that my company was doing well. Dad interrupted me to suggest I was getting ahead of myself and should focus on finding a husband instead of playing with computers. But if you'd explained the scale, would it have mattered? Because last night, Mom was very clear that my financial situation was irrelevant. She said I was a failure because I wasn't married with children. She didn't mean that. She did. And you all agreed with her." Derek stood up and walked to the window overlooking my private beach. "The rest of the family wants to see you. To apologize." "Do they want to apologize to me or to the billionaire?" "Both, I think. That's the problem, Derek. You can't separate the two. You can't love me for my money while being ashamed of me for my choices. We were never ashamed of you." "Really? Because last night Mom told a restaurant full of people that I was dead to your family." She was angry. She was honest. For the first time in years, she was completely honest about how this family sees me. Derek turned away from the window. What do you want from us, Sophia? I want you to see me. Really see me. Not the daughter you wished I was, not the sister you thought I should be, but the woman I actually am. We're seeing you now. Are you? Or are you just seeing the money? It was the same question I'd asked myself about every relationship in my life since I'd become wealthy. Did people value me for who I was, or for what I could provide? I don't know how to answer that, Derek admitted. Then maybe you should figure it out before we have another family dinner. After Derek left, I spent the rest of the weekend reviewing the messages that had accumulated. 17 voicemails from Mom, ranging from angry to desperate to pleading. 43 text messages from various family members, most of them asking for meetings or explanations. But it was the final message sent at 2 a.m. that made me pause. Dad, I watched the news coverage of your charitable work. I had no idea. I'm proud of what you've built, but I'm ashamed of how we treated you. Can we start over? I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Dad, we can start over if you can learn to be proud of me for who I am, not just for what I've accomplished. His response came immediately. I'm ready to try. 6 months later, my family started joining me for Sunday dinners at the estate. Not because they'd suddenly become different people, but because they'd finally started asking better questions. Mom began volunteering for one of my education nonprofits. Dad started attending my speaking engagements, not to show off his successful daughter, but to understand the work that drove her. Derek asked for my advice on transitioning to social impact law. Melissa sought my guidance on ethical investment strategies. They were learning to see me as I was, rather than as they thought I should be. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation. Years of family dysfunction don't disappear overnight. But it was a beginning. And sometimes that's all you need. A beginning and the courage to demand the respect you deserve. Even from the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally. A year later, Mom introduced me at a charity gala as my daughter Sophia, who taught me that success comes in many forms, and that the most important form is being true to yourself. It was the first time she'd introduced me without apologizing for who I was. And the first time I truly felt like I belonged in my own family.